Hi everyone, it's great to be joining you today at the Media and Communications Forum for 2014. I've had a look at the program and sorry I can't be there in person, but it looks like a very exciting and informative event you've got planned. So I hope you get a lot out of the next little while and hope that this presentation also helps you inform how to show value and relevance of the communications function. So let's have a look at the agenda we're working through today. Firstly, I wanted to cover off a rationale for why use measurement and evaluation. What is it? And what are the best practice principles that we can apply to making sure it works well? Of course, we need to define what success looks like, to know when we have achieved success, and to show ways to approach your evaluation in a practical sense. Globally right now, there's a push for PR and media to show its value in business terms, and you very much know how important it is, but in the age of data and numbers, it needs to be proven. And I guess that's what we'll aim to do, is to bring that proof to you today and show you how standardised approaches are evolving that you can use. Okay, so what we're about really is quantifying communications results with robust numbers, showing where to focus for best effect, and in a way removing the guesswork to do that so that you can be more effective. That requires you to structure, quantify content and the delivery of that content. And that's something that's not necessarily easy to do, but there are ways to approach it, and we're going to cover those off today. I'd like to adopt some international best practice, particularly from AMEC, the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communications, and also here supported in Australia by the PRIA. Of course, bringing alongside PR to other organisational results is the way to show value, and I'll look at that quite carefully, because setting up evaluation is a bit of a consultative approach. It's not a tool. It's not a spray and pray with metrics like a lot of social media analysis, for example, gives you. And it's certainly not automated sentiment. This is back to old-fashioned principles of reading and looking at the meaning within the content, and we'll talk about that as well as we go through. So one of the approaches to smarter, not harder as a rationale is this diagram here, these arrows which show a circular flow of plan, do, review, refine. It's almost a quality improvement process that shows how you can use evaluation to change things that you're doing and improve their performance. So we know that advertising, for example, is all positive, but media is a lot trickier. The risks are higher, time is compressing. So this is about working smarter using that evaluation and using the consultative nature of how you structure and set up that evaluation. We're about being rigorous, systematic and structured, and linking pictures together. And importantly, as the bottom line, a lot of people would say to me, look, we just don't have budget to do anything at all here. But really, once you start to shift that discussion around to the understanding that you're generating about how to improve communications, how to achieve more with less, then that understanding itself is often recognised by senior managers as having a value all to its own. And at that stage, we often find that discussions about budgets melt away and things start to move forward. Okay, so let's look at some principles to how to approach measurement and evaluation. And what I'd like to introduce is a refinement of the Barcelona principles that many may have heard of. And here what we've done is we've re-edited these for Australia, Asia Pacific, if you will, and reduced the number of them and sharpened up the point of them. So let's run through them and see how useful they could be. First off, measurement and evaluation boosts your credibility and performance. When it's planned and integrated, more strategic value will result from your campaigns. Very important aspirational point to start with. Secondly, it's important to set strategic and measurable objectives in advance. If they're specific and they're measurable, then you will have an easier time of evaluating your performance. The third principle, communications creates business value in several steps. You do some activity, there's some output from that activity, there's an outcome in terms of attitude shift, and then finally some business or organisational return occurs. The fourth principle is that the valid measures of communications results are transparent and replicable metrics of quantity, quality, and size. Those three things we'll hammer through today, and we'll keep repeating. Quantity of coverage, quality of that coverage in terms of tonality, and the size of the media that carries the coverage. And finally, communications can and should be measured across all disciplines. PR, social, events, even advertising. The more complete the picture, the more valuable the insight that you will generate will become. So let's have a look at the US Institute for Public Relations and some of their guidelines about how to approach development of media measurement programs. There's three things they put forward which I think really do resonate, and I'll reference this paper here as well, International Media Analysis Made Simple. If you just Google that title, you'll find it comes up quite easily, because that's a very good area to read out on and see how different people have approached it. First off, let's think about it. What exactly are your communications efforts trying to achieve? How can this best be measured, and who would most benefit from that? Secondly, define what spells success to your organisation's management and the stakeholders. It might be two different things, so that's important to try and cover off, because it doesn't mean you have to have one size fits all for your evaluation. You might have two threads to that evaluation and satisfy both users or both audiences with those threads. And thirdly, plan forward. Think ahead to how the answers will be used potentially to change your communications and contribute to organisational goals. I can't tell you how many times as research manager in a large multinational company, I'd have product managers come to me and say, we need to do research on X. And I'd say to them, well, if the answer came out as 42%, now what do you do with that answer? And they'd think for a moment and say, yeah, you're right. We need to think more deeply about what exactly we're going to research. So thinking ahead to how you're going to use information is very powerful. And this slide here starts to talk now about a path to value along a life cycle of media evaluation, where the value on the y-axis shows that the gains over time as you move through this life cycle, from no measurement up front, where you might be just counting clips or seeing an opportunity cost of the lost planning and the lost refinement opportunity, through to basic measurement with simple ratings, self-assessment, gives you a bit of a finding, surface understanding, to what I'd call real evaluation, where you go thorough on the assessment. Perhaps there's some independence in those ratings, which is important, and some research-based methodology, plus adopting the loop, the refinement loop we spoke about earlier, the plan, do, review, refine loop. And the final step to get some real deep understanding is to link that picture to the organisational outcomes, the reputation, the cost saved, the support or the speed to achieve some level of support from an audience that's important to you. So that's more about understanding the drivers and the strength of those drivers to achieve an optimal comms mix. And that's really where we all want to get to. It's really about how do we do most with least and focus on the areas that really do have the most effect. Let's look at shaping evaluation to suit you, and specifically with a view of designing your own framework. What's important to you, your stakeholders, and the project. First off, goal setting is really, really important. Without knowing what is success, you can't measure success. So being smart with how you go about setting those goals, with things like output examples, achieving a certain average tone. Perhaps that's a tone of 0.7 on a scale of -2 to +2. We use that scale, a 5-point scale, to get a nice granularity of the variance in tone, and across our clients that's the average. Or you could use a simple maximum negative rate of, say, 10% of coverage is negative. Anything more is starting to get of concern, anything less is great. Looking also at the size of media, which would depend on your area, and how much of that coverage gets a key message in it. Next up, the outcome measures, and we'll cover these in more detail as we move forward. Some of the levels of awareness or familiarity with an issue, or who would consider supporting and what percentage of your constituencies would consider supporting or advocate. And finally, as organisational results, the behaviour change, the reduction in cost or risk or complaints, or in fact CEO regard for and use of the communications function. Remember, as you put numbers around the communications function, you'll automatically get an extra level of consideration at that senior level of understanding. This matrix we put together looking at goals in an operating context for a council gives you examples of these. And I won't go through everything, but I'll give you a bit of a run through on the top line here, with the exciting example of a skate ramp and community support for a new skate ramp. That might involve meetings with the community, it might involve some media coverage, perhaps publishing the plans and storyboards at the library or shopping centre. And so some of the activity metrics which would be nice to capture around that would be the number of people attending, the volume, tone and size of the media coverage, and perhaps even the number of web visits to that web page that details what it is that's proposed. An outcome metric could be a survey of those in favour of the proposal, those aware of the proposal even more fundamentally, and looking at that by the different audience ages, for example, teenagers versus older folks, giving some feedback in favour to that, and an on-schedule approval would be a great example of a success in that case, as well as, obviously, when you build the facility, the usage and repeat usage. So have a look through the rest of these examples here in your own time, the rollout of recycling, the access to recreational services and facilities. And I'd really recommend that you consider when you start a campaign bringing together such a matrix, because you'll be able to capture a range of metrics across the council which are quite powerful to showing your value at a later stage. Let's move on now to some of the basic evaluation tools, if you like. This is a very simple tool brought across from the PR Industry Association of Canada that's now being put forward by PRAA in Australia. Very simple way to bring together your media coverage by capturing the date, the media outlet, the headline summary, and so on, the size of the media, and then the scale of tonality. In this case, we've got balanced, positive, and negative. I'd probably rather suggest you use a 5-point scale and then average that down each item of media and see if your average gets close to the 0.7 area at the bottom there, which we see as the benchmark. And then looking at different aspects of what is included in that coverage. Perhaps there's a criteria for a certain key message to be included, or for a spokesperson, and that uplifts the result of that. And you might weight that with 1 point or a different arrangement that you come up with. Similarly for graphics quite important to coverage. So I'll leave this with you. It's available on the PRAA website as well, and modify it as you will, and I'm happy to take questions in due course with that. Here's a scorecard output of that kind of work and how it could be reported, reporting the 3 metrics of size of media, amount of media coverage, the tonality and the size of that media coverage. In this case, we've got current month, last month, shift, and then a bit of a commentary, and a chart which draws that into showing a trend over time. Important to drill down on negative coverage so that you can see perhaps what topics are drawing that negative, which journalists are involved, and what size media and how negative that coverage was. Often we're called on at urgent pace to see if a train smash has in fact occurred, but you're harder on yourselves as a PR professional body than the external audience often is. So it's important to have some level of independence, if you will, in rating that tone of stories and keeping things in perspective. Okay, let's look now at a roadmap to value. How does communications flow through to business outcomes, and explore what I'd call that chain of value on the way through. Firstly, everything you do links to organisational results. Somewhere, sometime, somehow. It might be down the track, but that's my thesis, if you will. The other part that I see to that very commonly is that your work is undervalued. So let's look at how to establish the value of your work and show people so that they can realise how impactful communications is to changing attitudes and behaviours. One of the important steps to that realisation is to understand what is the cycle of communications. And this chart really just defines brand. You'll hear people talk about brand health and so on. It's just really these segments of becoming aware, considering an action or considering some issue, preferring some position to that issue, facilitating some action, taking action at the 6 o'clock mark at the bottom here, feeling a honeymoon and feeling good about that, but then perhaps going through a level of questioning and needing support to bring you through loyalty and progressing around the cycle again. So this applies to products as much as it can apply to issues and reputation as well. So let's have a look at how that could work. Let's give an example here of littering, for example. And the what cycle, the second ring here, we're looking at getting attention. There's the awareness factor. Next up, considering the fit with the values that someone might hold. Do they litter? Do they not litter in a certain situation? But the preference and the facilitation piece is if you like, is there a bin there? Well, firstly, do I prefer to bin it versus drop that piece of rubbish? And secondly, where's the bin? So the practical component kicks in before the behaviour here, right at the bottom, of being properly disposed of that rubbish and going through some level of feeling good about that and then working around till the next time it occurs. So if I take out the how level in the outer ring here and focusing on how do you achieve that, how do you get attention? Well, that's the message in the media. So we're pushing that out through communications. On the consideration side, to get a consideration around the fit with values, we'd need to look at demonising the antisocial aspect of littering and environmental consequence. The next level of preference, well, it's a personal risk versus reward. Is there a risk of being caught or a risk of antisocial kind of consideration of my behaviour? And then finally, facilitating it. Is the infrastructure there, or is it a carry-away thing to put in your pocket and dispose of later? So that's a very simple example of how you can deploy the Marcom cycle, and that cycle and those brand components can be measured by research. But let's start to draw together some of these themes and look at an overall best practice evaluation model. And I'd like to introduce this because a lot of work's gone into thinking through how we can capture the value and the chain of value from communications. In this case, starting with a business objective, we flow through to a communications objective, perhaps with some research behind it, like focus groups or interviews, which leads to some activity to be undertaken. Once that activity is undertaken, we see some outputs occur, then an outcome in terms of shifts of attitudes, and then finally some organisational result. So if I populate those, you'll start to see that come to life in terms of the activity involving media relations or events held or releases sent out or sponsorship undertaken, and you can log those events to go back to them later and see what that cost and then see what it generated in the outputs pillar. So this second pillar here, looking at the volume, the tone of coverage, the size, those three key metrics, and then any messages that came through, or perhaps share of voice. So you can loop around, importantly, from that second pillar back to the first pillar, back to your objectives, change some of the activity and do the review, refine loop we spoke of earlier. Next pillar here, we're looking at outcomes. So the outcomes are attitudinal, gathered by survey, people's awareness, understanding, support for an issue, or perhaps their intentions to act in a certain way or engagement with an issue. So again, you can loop around back to the communications objective, see if your activity came out the right way in the media in terms of outputs, and if it then resulted in a shift in people's thinking. And finally, the last pillar here, some results. So the organisational business results, lower costs, a lower number of complaints, perhaps community supports or votes, savings on things like cleansing and the example of littering, and underscoring that a behaviour change. So this, if you like, is a best practice international model, and I want to go through each pillar just quickly to give you examples of that, and these will be in the slide sets for you to follow up. So let's dive into the first pillar of activity undertaken, starting to look at what was the message or campaign, and here you'll see 4 examples, the amount of effort you spent there, the time, the date range, if you like, of that effort, how many journos perhaps you spoke to, and the media size, an indication of what coverage will happen. So this is an important one to remember. It's a log, if you like, to prompt you when you get to analysing the evaluation a bit later on. Then moving to the second pillar with outputs, the international best practice has shown these 2 pillars of metrics, key metrics, if you will, for the different types of media, traditional media, volume, tone, and media size, and then perhaps things like key message penetration, how many articles had the key message in them. Social media similar. We look at a few things a bit differently under the blogs and tweets. Remember, we don't count the comments to blogs or tweets or posts, and we only count the main post when it comes to volume, and so on through to the number of visits, views, retweets, and so on. Importantly, in social media, you want to get to the audience of most influence. And by just looking at a hashtag on a Twitter feed, you'll understand those people circulating around the important thought leaders and start to see who it is you need to watch to get a good feel of sentiment. Another way of presenting this then in terms of reporting is this mini report here in the outputs, which looks at the current and prior period, number of articles, average sentiment, size or opportunity to see, and then simply percentage favourable, neutral, negative. That gives a nice balanced view, if you like, as a mini scorecard. You might also look at the media mix, what portion of coverage was in newspapers versus online or radio, and perhaps even the topic items there. So we can even drill down further to go into things like spokesperson, coverage, and so on. But here's a bit of an overview of the types of things to include. As I say, this will be in notes, so feel free to go back and review these later. Moving on to the third pillar of outcomes, here's a way of blending the two together, where we're looking over time in this chart of media coverage and the percentage negative here in the darker shade below. We're starting to see something happened around this period of March to May in terms of crisis style. So let's overlay something on the chart to understand that. And sure enough, we start to see that there's a bit of an issue here in terms of complaints. So we can see complaints to council having a rise there, and the issue seems to be about the amalgamation of council. So we're looking here in the bar charts of a survey looking at the support for amalgamation as hitting an all-time low here, as perhaps some negative media and issues start to evolve. You might also find that in your survey, if you can do a measure of trust, we'll see the trust measure start to move down but then recover as your positive media and your media coverage takes hold again. So a chart like this with just a few series on it, and starts to get very powerful in telling a story and proving your value to shift things to a more positive state. And the final slide and pillar of business or organisational results, these can take many forms. Shifting support is clearly an organisational outcome of desirability, reducing resistance from key stakeholders, reducing complaints, or saving effort or cost, or in fact making money through increases in certain charges. Efficiency and effectiveness is a growing theme across business and organisation, so this is about doing more with less and working smarter, not harder. So in this last section, I'd like to wrap everything up and bring together these themes into a guideline or a set of guidelines for best practice measurement and evaluation. Firstly, setting objectives at the heart and the start of every campaign, very important. Next up, you've seen how we've built a structured assessment framework that's built for purpose, that's designed around your needs and should be designed and tweaked for each campaign. Next, to include the best practice metrics of the volume or count of coverage, the tone and the media size, those three metrics, nothing very complex in that, but very important and very powerful. And fourthly, to use reporting at multiple levels and always interpret and describe the results wherever you can. So using them at the tactical level for your media relations, using them at the operational level to refine the core strategy and plan, and then using them at a strategic level to link to organisational value wherever possible. And you'll recall the matrix we assembled there and the objectives and how they flowed through into some of those metrics. And finally, de-siloing, what I call de-siloing the research of the brand and reputation, bringing the research back to the evaluation to sit alongside so those can be interpreted as a holistic picture of what's happening, and a really nice way to start to show the value and show how communications does deliver results. A couple of final tips. Certainly, we aim to be informed by data rather than data driven. The data suggests things. It doesn't absolutely tell you what to do. It's important to give that your interpretation. And keep asking, so what? Until you're satisfied with the answer. So what happened next? Because your senior people will be asking that and wanting to see the link that you can draw from the outcomes of your communications work. Those processes and those approaches should help you elevate the value of your work and really prove that you're delivering a lot of organisational value across the work that you've done. So I'd like to point you now to lots more learning, some on my blog, some on our website, a lot of training courses on our website too that you can download, including also a recent webinar that covers this in a bit more detail. AMEC in the UK, international organisation based out of the UK, very powerful to see what's going on there. A good friend, Katie Payne in the US for her standards and approaching how you look at social media as well. All important things to have a look at and read. And a final slide we'll include in the deck, all about international white papers, where to go to read more. So I hope that's been useful and enjoyable, informative presentation. Looking forward to questions now, which we'll take live, and also take those and follow up if you want to go away and have a think about anything. Ask me some more questions. Happy to take those and respond when I can. So appreciate your attention, and looking forward to some questions now. Thank you.